Everybody, welcome to the video. It's Sunday, August 15th, and we're breaking down this 10-game day slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And the pitching up top looks pretty good, but once we get to the SP2 range, it does get quite ugly, so we'll have to sift through it a little bit, but I think we can make it work. Plus, we have plenty of good stacks to talk about, so it should be a fun one to break down today. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. We have football coming up, so I'll be doing a lot of extra content for that. Then I have my NASCAR live stream later today if you do want to check that out. And if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that if you do want to join the community. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the price they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus, instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And like I was saying earlier, the pitching up top does look pretty solid today. We have aces like Lucas Giolito, Sean Manaea, and Aaron Nola. Then we have a cheaper SP2 option who has a good strikeout matchup versus Detroit. He's got good strikeout upside, but he can be very boom or bust as well as he allows a ton of power in Tristan McKenzie. But we'll talk about him in a little bit. But we'll start up top with Lucas Giolito, $10,700. He's the most expensive pitcher on the slate. And I'm going to be honest, I hate rostering Giolito because I never know what I'm going to get. There's some games where he looks excellent, flawless, he gets over 30 fantasy points. And there's some games he gets like below 10 and the strikeouts just aren't there. So you never really know what you're going to get out of Giolito. I'd say he's more of a GPP pitcher here, but you could play him in cash games if you want. I wouldn't have a problem with that. The matchup versus the Yankees is kind of boomer bust. He's a boomer bust pitcher in a boomer bust matchup because the Yankees have a ton of power, but they also strike out quite a bit as well. And it's kind of like the same thing with Lucas Giolito. So kind of scary here, but I think he's in a solid enough spot where he's going to have some interest today. 7.5K prop, pretty heavy favorite. Do you think that White Sox stack does look pretty good today versus lefties? They do profile pretty well versus left-handed pitching. A team total below 4 against him. He's pitching at home. And if we're looking at his splits on the season, they're pretty solid. I mean, the ERA, XFIP, and SIERA all around 3.7, 3.8, which is a little bit up there for a guy that's nearly $11,000, but strikeout rate's close enough to 30%. He does give up power, though. That's like his one struggle point this season, 181 ISO given up and 1.5 homers per 9. But oddly enough, the hard contact rate's only at 31%, which is not bad. So, again, Giolito, I mean, he's kind of a boomer bust option here, but I do think he's viable in this matchup versus New York as long as the strikeouts are there today. Then Sean Manaea, $10,400. Out of the big three here in Giolito, Aaron Nola, and himself, I would say he's the safest option here as he definitely draws the softest matchup of the bunch. Like, Giolito's got the Yankees. They have plenty of firepower. The Reds have plenty of firepower. I mean, we saw Zach Wheeler the other night. He's been pitching awesome all season long. He got banged up versus the Cincinnati Reds a little bit. But when I guess the Texas Rangers, who really don't have one good bat in their lineup, yes, Adolis Garcia has some power, but he's definitely faded off a bit as the season has progressed. There's no more Joey Gallo. Like, this is a very, very bad lineup, and 3.75 ply team total here, pretty heavy favorite, 5K prop. I know the past two games for Manaea have been pretty terrible, but before that, he was on a nice hot streak of scoring over 30 fantasy points, so he's been a little bit up or down as well, I guess, the past month or so now, but I think he'll be just fine here. Like, he's a good pitcher. Strikeout rate close to 27%. Doesn't really walk a lot of guys. XFIP's below 3.5. Doesn't give up too much power. Has a lean to the ground balls. Doesn't give up a ton of hard contact. About a homer allowed per 9. And if we're looking at the Rangers splits versus left-handed pitching this season, it's pretty ugly. They don't strike out a ton, 23.3% of the time, but only a 6% walk rate, 131 team ISO, and an 81 WRC plus with a 287 WOBA. I can't imagine he's going to give up too much runs here. I think the Oakland A's stack looks pretty good today. I think he can get you that 4-point win bonus, so he's a bit pricey here, and I know the recent form hasn't exactly been fantastic, but overall, I do think he's a very solid option and safe option on today's slate. Then Aaron Nola, $10,000. If you are chasing upside, I mean, he has the upside of being one of the best pitchers in baseball any single time he's on the mound. Like, I know this last start versus the Dodgers, he looked fantastic, and I mean, he can be one of those guys that's a bit up or down, but when he's on his game, Aaron Nola is fantastic. Does not matter who the lineup is, and I mean, the Reds have a good lineup. I mean, Nick Castellanos, Joey Votto, Tyler Stevenson, or Tucker Barnhart, whoever they start that day, Jonathan India, Jesse Winker. Like, this is a pretty loaded lineup, but at least we're away from Great American Small Park. Philly's not the greatest place to pitch, but it's still better than Cincinnati. $10,000, he's cheaper than Manaea and Giolito, and I'd say he has similar upside, if not higher upside. I mean, his numbers on the season have been pretty excellent. I know the ERA is above 4.25, but the XFIP's at 3.3, SIERA's below 3.3, very close to a 30% K rate, only a 5% walk rate, doesn't allow a ton of power. It's at 178, so it's a little bit up there, but it's nothing insane. It's still below Giolito, pretty close to it, but nothing crazy. Hard contact rate similar to the other pitchers we're going to talk about. and about 1.3 homers allowed per 9. Again, the matchup versus the Reds is not exactly great, but I think he'll be just fine. I do like that price point quite a bit. And if you're looking for a cheaper SP2 today, there's some other guys I think are viable. Like you could use Hernandez or Mills in that Chicago Cubs and Miami Marlins game, which should be pretty low scoring, but I'm just having a hard time trusting either pitcher here. But they're viable. Should be a very low scoring game. Both have team totals in the 3. But Tristan McKenzie here at least has some upside in the strikeout department. On the season, he's got a 27% K rate. Well, that's about the only thing I can say about Tristan McKenzie this season, because he walks a lot of guys. He's sitting at a 14% walk rate on the season. He's giving away 222 ISO, 34% hard contact rate, and close to 2 homers per 9. And I'm just a little bit worried here because the Detroit Tigers are not like a pushover team these days. Like early in the season and in the past couple years, yeah, we can always roster pitchers against Detroit. Well, they've definitely improved this season. They've actually got some decent bats in the lineup. Now, they still strike out quite a bit versus righties, but their numbers aren't as bad as you'd really think. And I've rostered the Detroit Tigers stack, quite a bit over the past month or so now, but they're still striking out over 25.5% of the time versus righties, but the WRC plus is close to 100. The WOBA is above 300. The ISO is at 163 now. This is no longer a push-over matchup, but I think Tristan McKenzie, if the strikeouts can be there today, and he gives up a run or two at $7,800, I don't think he's a bad option. He's a slight favorite here. If the Indians can pick up the win, that 4-point bonus would definitely go a long way as well. But we got to be careful here. XFIP at 5, Sierra at 4 3/4. I mean, the only good thing about Tristan McKenzie is the strikeout right now. He's got an electric arm. He's still a young pitcher. I think he'll be good down the road. But as of right now, there's definitely some concerning points with Tristan McKenzie. But I do think he's viable on today's slate if you need to save a little bit for your pitching to get some expensive bats. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the pitchers, so we'll move right over to the stacks. All right, so the first team I want to talk about is going to be very, very popular today. They have the best matchup on the slate. They have the highest team total at nearly 6.5 right now. It's a little bit above that. They're in a good hitter's park, and they just went off yesterday for a couple of touchdowns. But it's the Boston Red Sox here versus a pretty bad lefty in Keegan Akin. And all these guys are in play for me today. I prefer the right-handed bats because Akin does really struggle with them, but we can use lefties too, because we can assume that Akin's probably not going to last too long in this game. Because if you're stacking the Red Sox, you're assuming some damage is going to be done versus Akin. So let's see some righties at some point anyway. So I think there's some pretty good tournament plays, but the righties overall look very good today. Kike Hernandez leading off. I assume he's going to be quite popular. Xander Bogaerts, JD Martinez, Hunter Renfroe. Like the one thing he does well is hit lefty for power. So I mean, I think he's a fine option, although he's getting a little bit lower in the order these days with the new addition of Kyle Schwarber, but still an excellent play in my opinion. Then Vasquez and Dahlberg are kind of like lineup fillers, but they are cheap and they do a little bit of pop versus left-handed pitching. But all these guys are in play. Akin's got above an AE or A on the season, and I mean, it's just a smash spot. They're going to be very popular, so this is where you're going to go in cash games if you want to fade in tournaments. I get it. There's some other good teams, but these guys are definitely the best overall projection plays on the entire slate today. And then moving right above the Red Sox here, we have the Tampa Bay Rays on the road versus Charlie Barnes, a pretty bad lefty. It's not a big sample size on him this year, but every single start he's given up runs. And any single time we get the Tampa Bay Rays outside of the Trop, which is one of the worst places to hit in all of baseball, it's always going to be a major boost for them. They have a team total close to 6 today, and quite a few of these guys do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Arozarena, assuming he's leading off versus a lefty, he's only $4,200. I think he makes a lot of sense there. Nelson Cruz returning to Minnesota. I don't think he has any vengeance. I mean, he's getting way up there in his career at this point, but he crushes left-handed pitching. Juan Franco, $4,700, still young. He hasn't really exactly been great this year, but we know he's got plenty of upside. Diaz, potentially hitting cleanup here. Not a lot of power there, but he hits for a high batting average, especially versus lefties. Meadows is fine in tournaments, assuming we see some righties at some point. Manuel Margot, below 3K. He's got some okay splits versus lefties. Brandon Lau, prefer him versus righties, but I mean, I think he's fine in tournaments. Mike Zunino's got all the power in the world. He just strikes out half the time. And Joey Wendell, probably not have any interest in my opinion today, but I think all these guys are in play. Quite a few of them do hit lefties pretty well, and it's a big park shift going from the Trop to Minnesota, and you get those guaranteed linear bats as well since they're on the road. And then moving on to the Atlanta Braves here, the matchup versus Espino is not as great as the other offenses we just talked about, but he's not that great of a pitcher, giving up close to a 200 ISO on the season. And on the road, so you get those guaranteed thing at bats, and they have a team total above 5.5 today. And the Washington bullpen isn't exactly the greatest thing out there in the world, but I mean, this is just a good overall hitting team. Besides Albies, these guys are all below $5,000 now. It's pretty much around $4,000 to $5,000. Mix in some cheaper bats from other teams today. I think you can make this work, but all these guys are in play for me. Albies, I prefer him versus lefties, but he still has above a 200 ISO this season versus right-handed pitching. Soler, prefer him versus lefties, but Freddie Freeman, $4,900, definitely one of the best first baseman plays on today's slate. Austin Riley's hit righties well this season. Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall, Travis d'Arnaud, Jock Peterson. All these guys are in play, in my opinion. It's just a good overall batting team, and they're an offense that can pop off pretty much each and every single day, assuming they're not facing like an elite level pitcher. But Espino definitely is not that, and I think the Braves look pretty solid today. And it's just a way to get a little bit contrarian because I'm assuming the Red Sox and Rays are going to have a lot of ownership today, and there's some other teams that should pick up some ownership as well. So if you're looking for a contrarian good stack today, I think the Braves do make plenty of sense. And then moving on to a bit of a cheaper stack here, we have the St. Louis Cardinals versus Kris Bubic, and they have a team total north of 5 today. And I can see this being a pretty high-scoring game. The Kansas City Royals get the face-off versus J Happ. I'm not going to mention the Royals today just because I don't really like their offense overall, but there's quite a few bats in there. I shouldn't say quite a few. I think there's a couple bats that do look pretty solid, especially Salvador Perez. I think he's one of the better overall plays in the slate today. I'd be kind of shocked if he doesn't take J Happ deep today, so I just want to mention that Salvador Perez definitely in play at catcher today, but the Cardinals are actually a pretty solid team versus left-handed pitching, and Kris Bubic does not scare me in the slightest. But if we look at these guys as splits versus lefties, Tommy Edmonds got a 262 ISO, batting 300 versus them, close to a 400 WOBA, only a 12% K rate. Paul Goldschmidt, the power hasn't really been there this year, but we know over the course of his career he's been fine versus lefties. Arenado is smashing lefties this season with a 320 batting average and a 333 ISO. Tyler O'Neill, a 182 ISO. Matt Carpenter, he is absolute buns versus lefties, but it's not a big sample size this year. But he's $2,200 if he's in the lineup. I don't hate it. He'll see a righty at some point anyway. Yadier Molina, 261 ISO with a 126 WRC plus. Harrison Bader at 273 ISO, and Paul DeJong with a 200 ISO. So these guys actually profile quite well versus left-handed pitching. They're not overly expensive besides Arenado today, so I think they're a pretty nice cheap stack. If you want to like do a mini stack here and pair them with an expensive stack today, I don't think that's a problem whatsoever. And the last stack I want to talk about here is just purely because of the price. And I talked about this yesterday where I wasn't in love with the Twins overall, but I love their price points because they're priced like they're facing Jacob deGrom. That's simply not the case here. I think Patino is going to be fine down the road, but I mean, I know their team total is not very high, but these guys are just way too cheap. And some of these bats are pretty solid. They went off yesterday. Not that I'm expecting that once again here, but I mean, Max Kepler can hit righties just fine. Brent Rooker, Jorge Polanco, he's a guy that really stands out to me. Below $3,000, you can play him at second base. He's got fine splits versus righties. I just don't know why he's that cheap. Josh Johnson's got plenty of power batting cleanup here, below 4K. Luis Arias is batting over 300 this season, or right around it, and he's only $2,600. Mitch Garver, one of the best hitting catchers in baseball, below 4K. Like, this is a dirt cheap lineup with some upside. I know the team total is not great, but just value-wise, these guys look very good point per dollar-wise. And if we're looking at Patino's splits on the season, again, I don't think he's bad or anything. He does have an X of close to 5. The strikeout rate's fine. He doesn't give up a ton of power, but a 55% fly ball rate, 35% hard contact rate, and over 1.5 homers per 9. So this is purely just a price play. If you want to stack expensive Boston Red Sox today or Tampa Bay Rays or Atlanta Braves, you might want to mix in some cheap Twins bats, and then you can double spend it for a pitcher. I think that might be a pretty solid way to go on today's slate. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can do so using the handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want access to all the extra content and my entire spreadsheet. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. It's just you versus projections, no sharks, 150 max contests, side cap restrictions, anything like that. Just you versus the price they offer each and every single day. And if you're new signing over on PrizePicks, you can use code CPENNY to get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage? But I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. I will stop rambling, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday.